Listen closely, my friends. There is a kind of person who walks into a room and says almost nothing, and somehow everyone else adjusts. Their voice doesn't rise. Their hands don't move with urgency. They don't perform certainty. And yet somehow the room organizes itself around them, the way iron filings organize themselves around something they cannot see but can feel. Most people spend their whole lives trying to be that person the wrong way. They raise their voice when they want to be taken seriously. They argue longer when they want to be believed. They explain more when they want to be understood. And the strange tragedy is that all of this effort produces the opposite result. The room doesn't lean in. It leans away. A deep ocean has never once needed to prove its depth, and yet nothing doubts it. The things in this world that command the most respect are almost always the quietest things in it. Loudness is the language of things that are not sure of themselves. Stillness is the language of things that are. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years before modern psychology gave it a name. Marcus Aurelius, a man who held more power than almost anyone alive in his century, was not remembered for his temper. He was remembered for the opposite, for a stillness that unsettled people more than shouting ever could. Because shouting can be matched, stillness cannot. Today I want to walk through 10 phrases. Quiet phrases. The kind that a calm man or a calm woman says once, without flinching, and somehow the entire emotional weather of a room changes. These are not weapons. They are not manipulation. They are boundaries spoken the way nature speaks them, without apology and without noise. Stay until the end, because the 9th phrase is the one almost nobody is brave enough to say, and the 10th one is the one that actually sets you free. Let's begin with the first. There is an old oak tree that has lived through 40 winters. Storms have come and gone, some of them violent enough to split younger trees in half. And yet the oak is still standing, not because it refused to move, but because it knew exactly how much to bend. It bent in the wind without losing its roots. That is the entire secret of survival in nature, and it is the entire secret of the first phrase. The first phrase is this: I understand you, and I still see it differently. Notice what this phrase does not do. It does not deny the other person's view. It does not pretend to agree just to keep the peace. It bends the way the oak bends, without breaking, without uprooting itself to please the storm. Most people think strength means standing rigid, refusing to acknowledge anything the other side says. But rigid trees are the ones that snap. Flexible trees are the ones still standing in spring. Picture a meeting. Someone presents an idea you know is flawed. The room senses the tension building. Normally, a person feels only 2 options: stay silent and swallow the disagreement, or attack the idea and create a battle. But there is a third way, the way of the oak. You simply say, I understand you, and I still see it differently. No volume, no emotional charge, just root and bend in the same sentence. Epictetus once observed that what disturbs people is rarely the event itself, but the meaning they attach to it. Disagreement is not actually dangerous. What feels dangerous is the fear that disagreement will be read as disrespect or rejection or conflict. But a person rooted in themselves does not need every conversation to end in agreement to feel safe. The oak does not need the wind to stop blowing. It only needs its roots to hold. I once heard about a young woman working her first job at a design firm, surrounded by people twice her age and far more senior. In a meeting, a partner proposed a direction for a client campaign that she knew, with quiet certainty, would fail. Years earlier, she would have either gone silent or argued too hard and been dismissed as inexperienced. Instead, she said only, "I understand the thinking behind it, and I see it differently." Then she explained briefly, without raising her voice, why. The room did not erupt. It went quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that comes when something unfamiliar walks in. Composure. After that meeting, 2 senior people began asking for her opinion before finalizing decisions. Nothing about her title had changed. Something about her root system had. This is the strange mathematics of respect. The less desperately you fight to be agreed with, the more people begin to suspect you might be worth listening to. Now the second phrase and its teacher is the river. A river never argues with a stone. It does not slow down to debate the stone's right to exist in its path. It simply moves around it, continues toward the sea, and over enough time, the stone itself is worn smooth by a force that never raised its voice even once. This is the model for the second phrase, which is this: I won't be pulled into that. There is a kind of conflict that exists purely to consume your energy. It rarely has a real destination. Someone provokes, not because they want a resolution, but because they want company in their disturbance. And most people, without realizing it, accept the invitation. They stop their own course, the way a river might foolishly try to fight a boulder head-on, wearing themselves down in a battle that was never necessary in the first place. Imagine someone trying to drag you into an old argument that has nothing to do with the present moment. Maybe it's a co-worker reviving a grudge during a meeting that was supposed to be about budgets. Maybe it's a relative bringing up an old wound at a dinner table where everyone else just wants to eat in peace. The instinct is to either defend yourself point by point or go cold and silent in resentment. But there is a third current available, the river's current. You say calmly, I won't be pulled into that. And then, like water meeting stone, you continue moving forward toward whatever you were actually there to do. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and one of the clearest examples of this is the energy people waste rehearsing arguments that serve no one. A river does not lie awake at night resenting the stone. It simply was never available to be stopped by it in the first place. There was a man, a project manager at a mid-sized company, who had a colleague who specialized in turning every disagreement into a referendum on someone's character. For years he engaged, he explained, he defended. Each time he lost a little more peace and the colleague lost nothing at all, because conflict was the colleague's natural habitat. One day, in the middle of another provocation, he simply said, I won't be pulled into that, and turned back to his screen. The colleague tried twice more over the following weeks. Each attempt landed on the same calm wall. Eventually, the provocations stopped completely, not because the colleague changed, because the river had simply stopped being interruptible. The third phrase belongs to the eagle. When a storm rises, most birds scatter low, fighting the wind, exhausting themselves against a force they cannot control. The eagle does something different. It rises. It uses the very turbulence of the storm to climb above it, finding calm air at a height the storm cannot reach. It does not fight the weather. It simply refuses to stay where the weather is violent. The third phrase is this: we'll speak again once the noise has settled. This phrase exists for a very specific moment, the moment when a conversation has stopped being a conversation and has become a storm. Raised voices, interruptions, the unmistakable feeling that someone wants to provoke a reaction more than they want to be understood. Most people, in this moment, try to out-argue the storm, matching volume with volume, accusation with accusation. But you cannot outshout a storm. You can only rise above it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself again and again that he was never obligated to share another person's disturbance. Their agitation was their weather system, not his. He could acknowledge it was happening without stepping inside it. This is exactly what the eagle does, and exactly what this phrase does. It does not deny the conflict exists. It simply declines to continue participating in it at ground level. Think of a heated family disagreement at a holiday table, the kind that starts over something small, and within minutes has unearthed a decade of old grievances. Someone is raising their voice. The temptation is to match it, because silence in that moment can feel like losing. But there is another option. You say, calmly, without leaving in anger, "We'll speak again once the noise has settled." And then you actually do something the eagle does. You rise, you leave the table, or the room, or simply the emotional altitude of the argument without slamming a single door. A woman once told me about a years-long pattern with her sister, where every visit eventually collapsed into the same explosive argument, the same accusations, the same wounds reopened like a wound that had never been allowed to close. One visit, instead of staying at ground level and fighting through the turbulence as she always had, she said only, "We'll speak again once the noise has settled," and went for a walk. Her sister called her cold, but 3 days later, her sister called again, this time in a different voice, asking if they could try the conversation once more. The storm had passed because, for once, nobody had stayed inside it feeding it. The fourth phrase teaches itself through the mountain. A mountain has never once explained why it is tall. It does not campaign for the right to exist at its height. It simply stands, undeniable, and the world organizes its understanding around the mountain rather than the other way around. There is a kind of self-respect that works the same way, the fourth phrase, which is this: I don't need to explain myself to feel at peace. So much modern anxiety comes from an invisible belief that every choice requires a defense. Why did you leave that job? Why aren't you married yet? Why did you say no? Why did you change your mind? Each question, innocent or not, carries an unspoken demand: justify your existence to me. And most people comply automatically, offering paragraph after paragraph of explanation to people who were never actually entitled to one. The Stoics drew a hard line between what belonged to them and what did not. Their reputation, other people's opinions, the judgments of strangers, these all sat firmly outside their control, and therefore outside their responsibility. A mountain does not concern itself with whether a passing cloud finds its height excessive. The fourth phrase carries that same indifference, not from arrogance, but from internal settledness. A man in his 50s once described to me the years he spent over explaining a decision to leave a stable, well-paying career to start something of his own. Every family gathering became a small interrogation. Every explanation he gave was met with more questions, because explanations, offered nervously, only invite more scrutiny. Eventually, he stopped. When someone asked why he had left his old job, again, for the 10th time, he simply said, "I don't need to explain myself to feel at peace." The question, asked many times before, was never asked again. Not because people suddenly understood his reasoning, because he had stopped supplying ammunition for further questioning. The mountain had simply stopped answering for its height. The fifth phrase comes from the deep ocean, the part far below the surface that no storm has ever reached. On the surface of the ocean, weather rules everything. Waves rise into violence, then collapse, then rise again, restless and reactive to every shift in wind. But descend far enough, and the same ocean becomes utterly still, undisturbed. The storms above never touch the calm below, because the depth was never built from the same material as the surface. The fifth phrase is this: I release this. I keep my peace. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes not from an event itself, but from refusing to let the event finish happening. A harsh comment from a year ago, replayed at 2 in the morning. An insult from someone who has long since forgotten saying it, still occupying real estate in your mind today. Seneca warned that we often torture ourselves more thoroughly than our enemies ever managed to, simply by refusing to put the weapon down ourselves. This phrase is spoken not necessarily to another person, but to yourself in the quiet aftermath of something painful. I release this. I keep my peace. It is the conscious decision to let an event sink, the way the ocean lets a storm exhaust itself on the surface while the depths remain wholly unmoved. A woman once told me that for almost 2 years she replayed a single humiliating conversation with a former boss, rehearsing better comebacks she never got to use, rebuilding the argument she had lost in real time every single night before sleep. None of it changed anything that had already happened. It only meant the conversation continued, costing her peace, years after the person who started it had moved on entirely. The night she finally said to herself, out loud, alone in her apartment, "I release this. I keep my peace." She described it as the first night in 2 years she fell asleep without replaying anything at all. The storm above had finally been allowed to pass, because she stopped insisting on living at the surface. The 6th phrase belongs to the wolf, who never wastes a single howl. A wolf does not announce itself to every passing creature in the forest. It does not bark at every disturbance, every smaller animal, every flicker of movement. It conserves its voice, its energy, its attention for what actually matters to its survival. This selective silence is not weakness. It is precisely how a wolf remains a wolf instead of becoming exhausted prey. The 6th phrase is this: my silence is a choice, not a surrender. Many people equate silence with losing. If you don't respond to every comment, every provocation, every attempt to pull you into something small, it can feel like you've conceded ground. But the wolf understands something most people miss. Responding to everything makes you available to everyone, and availability to everyone is exhausting in a way that eventually breaks even the strongest creature. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself that he always retained the option of having no opinion about something, of declining to let a disturbance register as something requiring his energy at all. This is the wolf's discipline. Not every movement in the forest deserves a reaction. A man once described working in an office culture thick with passive-aggressive comments, the kind designed to bait a defensive response, to drag him into petty exchanges that produced nothing except drained energy by the end of each day. For a long time he answered every comment, explained himself constantly, and went home each evening feeling as though he had fought 10 small, unnecessary battles before lunch. When he finally began letting most of it pass unanswered, responding only when something genuinely mattered, colleagues noticed a shift they couldn't quite name. He had not become cold. He had simply stopped barking at every disturbance, and people began sensing correctly that his silence now meant something, because it was no longer constant. The 7th phrase is written in the rings of an old tree. Cut into any ancient tree, and you will find its entire history recorded. Every drought, every storm, every difficult year, preserved quietly inside the wood itself. The tree never announces these scars. It never recounts the year of the Great Freeze to anyone passing by. It simply holds its history inside, growing taller regardless of who notices. The 7th phrase is this: I won't compete for the final word. There is an addiction many people don't recognize in themselves, the addiction to having the last say, to ensuring the argument ends on their terms, with their sentence ringing in the air after everyone has left the room. But the need to have the last word is, more often than not, a quiet admission that something inside still feels unfinished, unproven, unsettled. A tree does not need the last word with the storm. It only needs to still be standing once the storm has passed. Epictetus often pointed out that people are disturbed less by what is said to them than by their own need to control how every exchange concludes. Letting someone else have the final sentence costs nothing if your sense of self does not depend on winning the exchange in the first place. A woman once recounted a years-long pattern in her marriage where every disagreement extended itself unnecessarily because neither person could allow the other to speak last. Small disagreements about dishes or schedules stretched into hour-long standoffs, not because the disagreement itself mattered, but because surrendering the final word felt, to both of them, like surrendering something deeper. The shift came the day she simply stopped reaching for it. Her husband made his final point, and instead of answering, she let it sit in the air, unchallenged, and went to make tea. The argument, for the first time in years, simply ended, because no one was feeding it anymore. The tree had stopped needing to out-argue the wind. It had simply continued growing. The eighth phrase belongs to the lion who walks away from a fight it does not need. A lion, fully capable of winning almost any confrontation in its territory, rarely fights unless survival genuinely demands it. Its power is precisely why it does not need to constantly prove that power. Weaker animals posture and bluff. The lion conserves its strength for moments that actually require it, walking past provocations that smaller creatures could never resist responding to. The eighth phrase is this: I forgive this, and I still walk away. This phrase frightens people who specialize in provocation because it denies them the two outcomes they expect, either your anger, which gives them the chaos they wanted, or your prolonged resentment, which gives them ongoing power over your peace. Forgiveness combined with departure gives them neither. It is the lion declining the fight entirely, not from fear, but from a complete absence of need to prove anything. Marcus Aurelius, ruling over people who betrayed him, criticized him, and worked against him constantly, wrote often about returning kindness even to those who wronged him, not because they deserved it, but because his own peace did not depend on punishing them for it. This is an enormously difficult discipline, the lion's discipline, choosing not to fight a battle you would almost certainly win, because winning it would cost you something far more valuable than the battle itself. A man once described a business partnership that ended in betrayal. A partner who had quietly redirected clients and credit toward himself for over a year before the truth surfaced. Every instinct told him to fight, to expose, to extract some visible justice from the situation. Instead, after everything was settled legally, he met the former partner one final time and said only, "I forgive this, and I still walk away." He told me later that the sentence cost him almost nothing to say and seemed to cost the other man everything to hear, because it offered him no fight to win and no anger to hide behind. The lion had simply decided the fight wasn't worth its strength. The ninth phrase, the one almost nobody is brave enough to say, comes from the diamond, formed in complete darkness, under more pressure than almost anything else in nature, long before a single person ever sees it. A diamond does not form because someone is watching. It forms deep underground, under unimaginable pressure, over unimaginable time, completely unseen, completely unvalidated, and only afterward does it ever surface into light. Its worth was decided long before any audience existed to confirm it. The ninth phrase is this: my worth was never yours to confirm. This is the phrase that terrifies people who derive their own sense of power from controlling how others see themselves, because it removes the one lever they were depending on. Most people, without realizing it, hand strangers, critics, even casual acquaintances, a kind of invisible vote over their own self-worth. Each compliment inflates them. Each criticism deflates them. Their value rises and falls based on an external panel of judges who, more often than not, are no more qualified to issue that verdict than the person receiving it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the opinions others hold about us are simply not within our control, and chasing their approval is therefore chasing something inherently unstable, something that can be given generously today and withdrawn cruelly tomorrow, for reasons that often have nothing to do with us at all. A diamond does not need approval to be a diamond. It already was one in the dark, long before anyone saw it shine. A young man once described years spent chasing recognition from a mentor who never gave it freely, working harder, achieving more, hoping that one project, one promotion, one success would finally produce the validation he was certain he needed. It never came, not because his work wasn't good, but because some people are simply not in the business of distributing approval, regardless of what is placed in front of them. The day he stopped waiting, the day he said to himself quietly, "My worth was never his to confirm," he described an almost physical sensation of weight leaving his shoulders. His work did not change. His need for permission to value it did. And the 10th phrase, the one that actually sets you free, comes from the night sky, untouched by anything said or done far below it, ancient, distant, and entirely unbothered. The stars above us are burning the same way they were burning 1,000 years before any of today's conflicts existed, and they will burn the same way 1,000 years after every person currently arguing is gone. Nothing said on the surface of the earth has ever once reached far enough to disturb them. The 10th phrase is this: "I wish you well, even now." This is, without question, the hardest phrase on this list to say honestly, and also the one that carries the most freedom inside it. Bitterness, the Stoics warned repeatedly, is a chain, and the strange cruelty of that chain is that it binds you to the very person who hurt you, keeping them present in your mind long after they have stopped thinking of you at all. Seneca observed that the deepest remedy for anger is simply time, deliberately allowed to pass before reacting. Saying "I wish you well, even now" does not mean the harm didn't happen. It does not mean reconciliation, or forgetting, or pretending the wound was small. It means refusing to let that wound keep functioning as a leash. It is the night sky's particular kind of power, the power of being utterly unreachable by what happens far below, not because you don't feel it, but because you have decided not to orbit it forever. A woman once told me about a friendship that ended badly, full of betrayal and public humiliation, the kind of ending that usually produces years of rehearsed resentment. For a long time, she carried it exactly that way. Then, almost by accident, at a mutual friends' gathering, she found herself face to face with the woman who had hurt her so deeply. Every old instinct rose at once. But instead, she said quietly, "I wish you well, even now," and meant it more than she expected to. She told me afterward that walking away from that conversation felt lighter than any version of revenge she had imagined for years. The bitterness had finally stopped costing her anything, because she had simply stopped paying it. There is a thread running through everything we've covered today: the oak, the river, the eagle, the mountain, the ocean, the wolf, the tree rings, the lion, the diamond, the stars. None of them perform their strength. None of them raise their voice to prove they belong exactly where they are. Their power is simply present, undeniable, and entirely unconcerned with being acknowledged. Respect, real respect, the kind that lingers in a room long after you've left it, has never once been built from volume. It is built quietly, sentence by sentence, boundary by boundary, in the moments when staying calm would have been so much easier to abandon than to keep. Every time you choose composure over chaos, you are not weakening your position. You are doing exactly what the oak does in a storm, what the river does at the stone, what the deep ocean does beneath every passing wave. If even one of these 10 phrases found its way into you today, sit with it a while longer before you move on to whatever comes next. And if you've made it this far, I'd genuinely like to know, which one of these 10 would be hardest for you to say out loud in your own life this week?